You probably already know the OxyContin story. The Sackler family, Purdue Pharma, the prescription painkillers that flooded America, the lies told to doctors, the addiction, the lawsuits. There's a Hulu series about it. There are books, there are documentaries. The story has been told. What most people don't know about though is where fentanyl actually came from. Not the street drug, not the counterfeit pills, not the cartels. Before any of that, where did the drug itself come from? Who decided to push it beyond its intended use? How did a medicine invented to help dying cancer patients become the leading cause of death for Americans between the ages of 18 and 44? That is a story nobody has properly told, and it starts in Belgium in 1953. Paul Janssen was 26 years old when he set up his research laboratory on the third floor of his father's pharmaceutical company in Turnhout, Belgium. He had no calculator, he had no computer, he tested chemical compounds on pieces of gut from rabbits he collected each morning from a local butcher. He would later write, "We didn't even have a calculator, let alone a computer for the simplest of calculations." What he had was a medical degree, an obsession with chemistry, and a simple idea that existing painkillers were not good enough. Morphine worked, but it was unpredictable and hard to control. Patients in surgery were suffering. There had to be something better. Over 7 years, his small team synthesized hundreds of compounds looking for a more precise, more powerful, more controllable painkiller. In December 1960, they found it. Fentanyl. It was approximately 100 times more potent than morphine, the strongest opiate ever created at that point. Crucially for surgery, it acted fast and wore off quickly. Doctors could put a patient under, perform an operation and bring them back. Precisely, predictably. It was genuinely revolutionary. Fentanyl was first used clinically in Europe in 1963. The United States approved it in 1968 under the brand name Sublimaze for intravenous anesthesia. For 2 decades, it barely left the operating room. It was administered by trained anesthesists in hospital settings, and it saved lives. Janssen himself understood what he had created. A United Nations official who worked with him would later say fentanyl is a good medicine but a bad drug. Janssen knew the addiction potential was real. He built a career inventing medicines, more than 80 pharmaceutical compounds in his lifetime, including Imodium and several widely used antipsychotics. Janssen Pharmaceutica was sold to Johnson & Johnson in 1961. He continued working for them. He died in 2003 in Rome, attending a scientific meeting aged 77. He never intended what came next. That part belongs to other people. In 1990, the FDA approved the fentanyl patch, a slow-release version worn on the skin for chronic pain management in cancer patients. In 1998, it approved a fentanyl lozenge for breakthrough cancer pain. For the first time, fentanyl moved outside of hospitals into the hands of outpatient prescribers. That is the door that opened. Most people know what walked through it next, so I'll keep this brief. In 1996, a pharmaceutical company named Purdue Pharma launched OxyContin, an extended-release oxidone painkiller. At the launch party, the head of sales told the room that OxyContin would be followed by a blizzard of prescriptions that would, and I'm quoting directly, be so deep, dense and white. They trained sales representatives to tell doctors the drug was less addictive than other painkillers. They distributed videos claiming fewer than 1% of patients became addicted, a figure the FDA said had no scientific basis. Over the next decade, OxyContin generated $35 billion in revenue. Millions of Americans became dependent on prescription opioids. Oxycodone-related deaths increased 400% between 1996 and 2001. In 2007, Purdue pleaded guilty to misleading the public and paid $634 million in fines. The Sackler family, who owned the company, paid nothing personally. Between 2008 and 2018, as the addiction crisis intensified, the family withdrew almost $11 billion from Purdue and placed it in trusts and holding companies. In 2019, Purdue went bankrupt. The Sacklers settled for a fraction of what they extracted, and no family member has ever faced criminal charges. But here's the part that OxyContin's story usually ends on, and it's not the end. In 2010, Purdue reformulated OxyContin to make it harder to crush and inject. Researchers later found that up to 80% of the increase in heroin deaths following 2010 could be attributed directly to that reformulation. Millions of people already addicted to prescription opioids had lost their supply. They turned to heroin. The demand did not disappear, it just needed a new supplier. While Purdue was reformulating OxyContin, a man named John Kapoor was building something in Arizona. Kapoor came to the United States from India in 1972 with reportedly $5 in his pocket. He got a PhD in medicinal chemistry and discovered that real money in pharmaceuticals lay in getting generic drugs to the market the moment a brand name patent expired. In 1981, he invested $50,000 of his own money in a struggling generic drug business and sold it for close to $1 billion by 1990. He was late in his 40s. He had made a fortune legitimately. Most people would have stopped there. He didn't. By 2002, he had started a new pharmaceutical company called Innis Therapeutics. He poured more than $60 million of his own money into it over the following years. His wife had died of cancer. What Innis was developing, a fentanyl spray called Subsys, was intended for people exactly like her. Breakthrough cancer pain, the worst kind. Patients in the final stages of illness who needed the fastest, most powerful relief available. Subsys was approved by the FDA in January of 2012 for one specific use: breakthrough pain in adult cancer patients already receiving around-the-clock opioid therapy. The label was narrow by design. Fentanyl, at this potency, 50 to 100 times stronger than morphine, is not a drug you prescribe carelessly. Innis did not prescribe it carelessly. They prescribed it criminally. Here's how the operation worked. Innis identified doctors who were already high-volume opioid prescribers, not oncologists, pain clinic operators. Doctors whose patients had back pain, headaches, general chronic pain. Doctors who, in the words of one internal Innis email, ran very shady pill mills that only accept cash. The company paid these doctors to speak at educational events. In theory, these were seminars where doctors shared clinical knowledge with colleagues. In reality, they were dinner parties. The audience was the doctor's friends. The educational content was a justification for the payment. An internal email from the VP of sales put it plainly. The doctors, he wrote, do not need to be good speakers. They need to write a lot of prescriptions. The more prescriptions a doctor wrote and the higher the dose, the more speaking engagements they received. To get insurance companies to pay for Subsys, which required prior authorization because most patients did not have cancer, Innis set up a dedicated call center inside the company called the Innis Reimbursement Center. Its employees were trained on a script called the Spiel. Their job was to call insurance companies, pretend to be staff from the prescribing doctor's office, and tell the insurers that the patients had cancer and needed the drug. A former employee later testified that around 10% of the patients she helped get approved actually had cancer. One patient, who was asked to be identified only as Lara, was prescribed Subsys after his doctor told his insurance company he had cancer and could not swallow other medications. He did not have cancer. He told the press he had not known what he was being given. I didn't know what fentanyl was, he said. The operation ran from 2012 to 2015. In that time, Innis grew its net revenue by more than 1,000%. By 2015, Subsys was generating $330 million a year. Kapoor appeared on the Forbes 400 list of America's wealthiest people with a net worth of $3.3 billion. At the 2015 annual sales conference, to motivate the team, the company played a 5-minute rap video. It featured 2 salesmen in sunglasses and hoodies dancing around a giant life-size fentanyl spray bottle costume. The bottle was labelled with the maximum dose, 1600 micrograms. The chorus went, "I love titration, yeah, that's not a problem. I got new patients and I got a lot of them." Titration means increasing the dose. When the video ended, the man inside the fentanyl bottle costume took it off. It was the company's VP of sales. Former CEO Michael Babich later testified that John Kapoor had watched that video with him. In October 2017, federal agents arrested Kapoor in Phoenix, Arizona, in an early morning raid. In May 2019, after 15 days of jury deliberations, Kapoor and 4 co-defendants were found guilty of racketeering conspiracy, the same charges used to prosecute the mafia. The prosecutor's statement at sentencing: motivated by sheer greed, they lied to insurance companies and are no better than street-level drug dealers. In January 2020, John Kapoor was sentenced to 5.5 years in prison. He was the first pharmaceutical CEO to be in prison for his role in the opioid crisis. Innis paid $225 million to settle criminal and civil charges. Filed for bankruptcy, the Subsys license was sold to another company. In 2018 alone, more than 7,200 people died while taking Subsys. By the time Kapoor was arrested, the market had already moved on. The Sinaloa cartel had been producing fentanyl since 2012. Initially, they added it to heroin to stretch out their supply and increase the high. They understood very quickly what they had. A kilo of heroin costs around $50,000. A kilo of fentanyl, which is 30 times more potent, costs around $5,000. The reduction in cost per dose at wholesale is more than 99%. According to testimony before the US Congress from the head of the DEA, it costs the cartels as little as 10 cents to produce a fentanyl-laced counterfeit pill. Those pills sell on the street for $10 to $30 each. That is a profit margin of up to 30,000%. A former DEA special agent described the cartel's approach directly. Mexican cartels run a global enterprise. They run it like a Fortune 500 company right now. They implemented a strategic, deceptive marketing plan to drive addiction and to drive profits. They did not need to build the market from scratch. The pharmaceutical industry had spent 20 years building it for them. By 2016, fentanyl deaths had surpassed both prescription opioid and heroin deaths combined. In 2019, the US successfully lobbied China to restrict fentanyl production. Manufacturing shifted to Mexico, with Mexican cartels producing the drug themselves using precursor chemicals still sourced from China. Counterfeit pills pressed to look identical to OxyContin, Xanax, and Adderall flooded the market. In 2022, the DEA found that 6 out of every 10 counterfeit pills it tested contained a potentially lethal dose of fentanyl. In 2022, 73,838 Americans died from fentanyl overdoses. In Arizona, the street price of a fentanyl pill dropped from $20 in early 2021 to $5 by early 2022. Supply was so far ahead of demand that prices were falling as the death toll climbed. Since 1999, approximately 806,000 Americans have died from opioid overdoses. The Sacklers extracted $10 to $12 billion from Purdue Pharma before bankruptcy. They settled for up to $7 billion spread over 15 years. No family member has ever faced criminal charges. John Kapoor got 5.5 years. The cartels are still running. And the drug that started all of this was invented by a man testing rabbit gut in his father's building in Belgium in 1960, hoping to help people who were suffering. Every step between that moment and this one, someone made money. The public paid the bill.